But you want to be a lady.
I've left everything I ever had.
I know you think I'm not half good enough
A very respectable woman.
Give dinner parties and entertain your husband's friends.
I'm sure Cleopatra never bothered about napkin rings.
I'm not a well-behaved. But I want you to be absolutely perfect.
Welcome to the Well-Behaved Woman podcast.
Podcast musical.
Podcast musical.
That was so together. We're so good at this.
Okay, let's do like one word. Well,
Behaved.
no. Welcome
To
the
Well-Behaved
Woman podcast.
Musical.
Research episode number 5. Called The Second
Mouse Gets the Cheese, because the early bird gets the worm, but we're talking about people who start their careers later in life.
Yeah, we're talking about empty nesters, and we're talking about late stage careers and what that looks like for a woman in like her 50s, 60s.
After your kids are gone and your reason for existing is ended.
Because that is all we're good for.
What does one do with oneself?
Yeah, what does that look like?
And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, or if you were a woman who never had kids. You know what? We didn't talk to a single woman who never had kids.
What about us? We've never had kids.
But we're not 50
what
or
about
60.
Carissa? She didn't have kids.
She's not 50 or 60.
We don't know if Carol Ann Weaver had kids.
I think she did.
Oh, yeah, they both said they had daughters.
Daughters.
Right. Well.
Okay, we're missing a very important...
No, we did. Karen Thiessen. She's
You're
never
right.
had kids.
Good, I'm glad we got to hear her.
We have a whole section on that in her interview. Editing live.
Because that's an important story to tell.
It is.
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're going to talk about that today. All of those things.
Yes, we
are. And it's going to be really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And who is our first
to kick things
guest
off
up today?
We have our resident expert, Marlene Epp, who is a doctorate and professor and all sorts of wonderful things in gender studies,
you
women's
can tell
studies,
we're
Mennonite,
super academic by how we talk about.
Yeah, we respect her a lot.
We
but
do.
My language is not accurately reflected what she deserves to be introduced as.
She's been our expert in all of these subjects.
Yes. So this is her talking on women careers, late stage careers, etc. Here she is.
I mean, first wave feminism was kind of the 1920s and before that, and then there was kind of a lag, and we think of second wave feminism as really getting going in the mid 1960s and onward. So that doesn't mean feminism as a thought idea disappeared, but the Second World War was interesting, of course, for Canadian women and Mennonite women too, because so many of the men left their communities, whether for military service or in the case of Mennonites for alternative service. And this opened up all kinds of opportunities for women. We hear lots of stories about, Rosie the Riveter, the Canadian woman who goes off and works in the factories and so on. Mennonite women, and I've written a little bit about this and talked to some women who, they were able to sort of break out of the restrictions on them, in part because the income of whether it was their fathers or brothers or husbands, was lost for a number of years during the war. The men who were in, certainly a lot of Mennonite men joined the military, but that was another question. But the ones who had to do conscientious objection service, they had no income or very, very small little income. So many Mennonite women who would not have otherwise entered the workforce did so. There's factories here in Kitchener, where I live, which hired a lot of Mennonite women during both First and Second World Wars, because those factories were their production was geared for wartime production. So there's a big rubber industry here in Kitchener. There was in Kitchener, and they were producing a lot of rubber products for the war effort. And so a lot of Mennonite women were working in war industries in this community. And I think that's true in other urban areas as well, like Winnipeg. maybe not Vancouver yet, but Winnipeg's the Saskatoon. So that's one piece, just going into the workforce. And one of the big issues here in Ontario, which is more about, it's about the Swiss Mennonites who had they had more of a distinct dress styles, and they dropped some of their dress styles that the church told them to wear, like head coverings, because they're working in these secular factories, like these public factories. So it had a huge influence on their dress. In other cases, like Mennonite schools, whether it be high schools or Bible schools, there were a lot of Bible schools during this era, even before some of the Mennonite colleges started in Canada. They went to Bible schools, and they were basically filled their enrollment with women during the war, in Manitoba for sure, here in Ontario, probably elsewhere. So they needed to fill their classrooms. They needed to keep their enrollment going. So yeah, we'll admit women. So those kind of settings, just in part because their households needed income. These women took on all kinds of jobs, and some of and just being wage earners or money earners, even if it was in their own home, like doing laundry for people or producing material goods, sewn goods, that they were paid for. They developed a lot more autonomy or a sense of self as an economic producer. It also impacted churches. It didn't mean that suddenly churches wanted Mennonite women behind the pulpit, but my first research project was about Mennonite women who came out of the Soviet Union after the Second World War. And that was a large community of women without men. So Mennonites, and a lot of them went to the West Coast. My husband's family came from that story, where a lot of the men had disappeared during the Stalin era in the Soviet Union. So you have these families, these households that are mainly women and children and elderly people. And the women had to take not only leadership in their households and in earning income, but in spiritual ways as well. But again, that wasn't, necessarily recognized by the church. But if you read the stories of children of those mothers, they attribute their faith to the stories, the teachings of their mothers. Certainly one's, career, even idea of a career was acknowledged for women later in the 20th century, and for Mennonite women. Once your kids are home or have left home, my mom went back to school. She's 96 now. She went back to school basically when my sisters and I went to university. She went to university and went to graduate school and became a social worker and a counselor, and went on to take on some pretty important administrative positions locally here. So that was a whole new thing. I think it was threatening to my dad because, the big thing is how it upsets the household, even when there's no children there anymore. Because if she, has a husband at home, there's been this decades-long expectation of the labor that she does in the household. And if she has a late-stage career, she may want to spread out that household labor a little bit. And that's then that becomes a bit more challenging. There's Mennonite women with amazing, who've gone on to amazing careers. Well, I kind of stay away from theology and Bible interpretation because that's not my thing. What's interesting is, as I'm thinking about Mennonite women and second wave feminism, is the biggest impact, I think, was the number of women who demanded ordination as pastors. And many of those initially, they were older women who had raised their children and then found a vocation or a call, or however you want to view it, as in the church, and they didn't want to be Sunday school teachers anymore. They wanted to preach and teach in that way. So the first wave of Mennonite women pastors, I think, were older women who were doing this as either a second career or as their first career after raising children. Now, of course, you have many Mennonite women who, that's where they head straight for that as their first career.
Yeah, it's definitely shifted.
Yeah. And I think this is all influenced by, the women's movement of the latter 20th century. Mennonites don't live in a vacuum. They sometimes like to think they do. And we have these images, mythology of being a separate people or being self-contained and not being influenced by the world. But certainly when it comes to ideological movements, and like feminism, like the women's movement, that pushed and shoved Mennonites in so many ways.
So we got to interview the first woman moderator in the Mennonite General Conference Church. Her name was Florence Dreger.
In Canada.
She got put in that position in the 80s.
Yeah. And through a series of events, which you'll hear, it was a pretty controversial thing at the time, which I guess makes sense knowing the history of faith and religion and the world. But it was really cool talking to her. This woman is in her 90s.
Yeah.
And she is sharp as a sharp thing.
Sharp as a knife.
Sure, sharp as a knife. And had just like dates and names and just everything off the top of her head. It was so cool to hear her story, and yeah, it was lovely meeting her. So
yeah, so we hope you enjoy hearing what she has to say.
Yeah.
My mother came from Kansas and my dad from Manitoba. Then when my parents got married in 1930, and I was born in 1933, the school would have a piano and we'd sing and we'd have sing-alongs. And then usually these musicians would come to our place, or these singing people would come to our place. We might sing some more. My mother home ec was her skill, although she was a teacher as well. They made sure that we all had piano lessons. Our piano teacher was Elizabeth LeBoon, who was a phenomenal person. She was single. She taught many students, but she lived about 4 or 5 miles away. And so I learned to sing, but mainly play piano. I went to to CMBC for 1 year, and then 2 years in Bethel. And that's where I met Otto. So we got married, and I was going to be at home like women were, and he would work. Well, he got a job as a social worker. They said, well, what's she doing? Well, she's just at home. Well, would she consider coming and working? Well, so he came home. He says, would you like to have a job? I said, sure. So I became an assistant social worker. We worked for 2 years. Then we went to McGill. They had scholarships that they would send us to a university for our master's in social work, and they'd pay us for going and so forth. The first Sunday we were in McGill in Montreal, we went to the Baptist church there, and lo and behold, we saw these 2 women with white caps. So we knew that they had to be, and we stopped by and asked, where are you from? And so on. It was their first Sunday at this Baptist church and our first Sunday. So we said, well, come on over. We were living in an apartment and come over, and we decided we'd meet once a week and have a Bible study. And that became the beginning of the Mennonite church in Montreal, in Quebec. So the both of us went to McGill, got our master's in social work, went back. We had to go back to Saskatchewan, work for social services for 3 years, and started working. Then J.J. Thiessen, who was a leader of Mennonite Church Canada, and they asked us whether we would take leadership of this mission church in Saskatoon, which it was teaching Sunday school And it wasn't a full-fledged church. It was a mission outreach. In the 80s, I think it was in the 80s, I was nominated as vice moderator for the general conference. And then that was in summer. And then just before Christmas, Bauman, Kenneth Bauman, I think it was Kenneth Bauman, was the moderator. And he got cancer, very fast working cancer, and died. And so then this was an interesting process. I mean, normally for any organizations, you have the assistant or the vice chair or vice CEO or, whatever the top name is called. And so here I'm the vice, and the chair dies. Well, any other organizations, the vice, that's automatic, that they then become the moderator. Well, a woman moderator in those days. And and of course, these aren't paid positions. This is all, volunteer. So the executive director, he wasn't sure either, because, this was totally unexpected. And but it was very interesting because, I said, well, I'm not the board. I mean, sure, I'm on the board, I'm a vice chair, but I'm not the decision maker. It's the total board and so forth. And I remember, and I don't know how I heard this, but it was somebody from BC that said that there were a group of women in BC that said, you have to take that position. But the other part of it was that there were some women, because this was at the time when women were starting to really say, we need a place that's important. And but the ones that had been that strong in they weren't that sure about a woman taking over, even though they were very much feminist, or very feminist. But I don't know why. But when it came to this, they weren't sure. But the senior women from BC were and and I don't know the senior women from BC, and yet I heard via the grapevine. Well, okay, so he had just been in his position for 6 months, and it was 3-year term. So then when it came to the next general meeting, or not the general meeting, the next conference, when they do the nominating, you can either let your name stand for the same position or not. Otherwise, it was automatic that the vice chair would become the chair. So I was, why not? Why shouldn't I? I carried it on so I just continued. And I always said I'm a church junkie. Or organizational junkie. But that's how I became the moderator of the General Conference of North America. In fact, I hired a secretary. I said to the General Conference, I said, all of you guys that were in these leadership positions, you all were pastors, and you had secretaries in your church that did your secretarial work. And, I think you should consider helping or giving me the opportunity to hire somebody to do my secretarial work, and they wouldn't let me. And yet the people before and after, they were all, pastors, and they had their secretaries in their church. I hired a secretary, and we paid her to do my secretarial work. And but we had to do some of those things in order for me to be able to carry the load, because we had a family. I was working full time. I wasn't sitting at home twiddling my thumb, but I found the values underlying social work profession, and my faith. I didn't proselytize. I didn't see that I lived what I believed. Well, I'm not like, I just see women and men as partners. We're human beings. We're not special one way or another. All people are human beings, and we're all created by God and loved by God, and we all have different skills and abilities, and some are better at teaching, others are at washing dishes, doesn't matter. For instance, my piano teacher, I mean, I was 7 and she was 30, but I never felt that I was a little kid. Well, I'm a person that feels very strongly about the importance of faith. My identity, I think it's we're hosts. People know that they can come and stay, and they're welcome. We have a house church. I will usually try and engage everybody in the discussions. It's very much a discussion type Bible study and Sunday school and so forth. But I try and engage people so that all feel welcomed. And my identity, I think it's we're hosts. People know that they can come and stay, and they're welcome. And we've been valued as people that welcome people.
Next up, we have Val Hebert, a professor. She works for MCC in the abuse and protection program.
Start again.
Yep. Next up, we have Val Hebert. She works as a co-coordinator for MCC Manitoba in their abuse and protection program. But she is also a really cool person and knows a lot about like feminism. And
honestly, I was like, I want to live your life. She lives on a farm with her, like, on like an acreage, and her kids also have homes on it.
And they have like pottery in their barn.
Yeah. She seems like she lives the dreamiest life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, we talked to her about the concept of gender and God's identity and the importance of seeing God as male and female. So here's a little what she had to say on that.
I'm sure you've read this. I'm sure you've heard this. If God is male, then male is God. And if that's where we start, there is no good place to go. If the God I pray to has to be a man, then I'm not being written into the story. I'm actively being written out of the story. And I want to live in the story. I don't want to be written out of the story. I want my story to matter just like everybody else's. Just want to be part of it. That's all. Don't need to rule. Don't need to defer. I just want to do my bit. So I actually think that naming God as both male and female is the only way we're going to pull out the taproot of patriarchy. Until our divine can be understood as both male and female, patriarchy will rule. I teach language and culture, and at Prov, I gave the students the optional assignment of spending 10 days only praying to a female God, naming her as female, only imagining a female image, and only speaking of her as female. It was optional. And then they were supposed to journal about it. It was shocking how their understandings of God changed into a more conversational God, a more nurturing God, a less judgmental God. Like all our female stereotypes came into play in how they understood God. It was fascinating.
We chatted with my friend Carissa Durant, who is a pastor in Winnipeg at a General Conference Mennonite church, and she is finishing her master's off at CMU right now. And she just is someone who is a kindred spirit to myself, but we've had so many great conversations about feminism and theology, and so we asked her of what's her take on feminism and how does it play into Mennonite culture.
How would you define feminism, and how would you think that supports or integrates into like Anabaptism and like Mennonite belief systems?
So I would say feminism is a way of looking at the world that understands the ways that patriarchy has oppressed certain groups of people and not. And I think feminism has developed into something greater than just women's inequality, like especially with intersectional feminism. I think we're starting to look at even the effects of patriarchy on Black men and like that or like Indigenous men. So I think that feminism kind of opens that floodway of like, who are the people who've been left out, or who are the people that the systems don't work for, the structures don't work for. I also don't think feminists are a monolith. Like, there's feminists that I don't agree with, and there's probably feminists that don't agree with me. And I actually think that's a bit of the beauty of feminism, is that you are really trying to empower people, and women particularly, to like find their voice, and it's okay for us to have opinions. Like, we don't just have to follow the script that the men had laid out for us. How I see that fitting with the church in general is I actually would call Jesus a practicing feminist before the word was even a thing. Like, we just there's so many, especially Catholic women, I feel like are under the most scrutiny in terms of like church feminism. So that's why I actually see the best feminist theologians coming out of the Catholic Church. They have a lot more institutional oppression. But they argue like Jesus came into a society that there was a way that the patriarchy operated, and Jesus came and didn't operate that way. He was counterintuitive. He would be alone with women, and honor them and take care of them. And women were part of his disciples, even though we don't narrate it that way. Like, we get one lines or like so that you have to read into. But and then I think specifically for Mennonites, I think back to the Radical Reformation and some of the original martyrs. Like, part of what Anabaptists were trying to do is saying that like, we don't need an institution to interpret the Bible for us. We as everyday people can read scripture. And so then women were part of those Bible studies, those first Bible studies that were the church. Like, they weren't having services like we do today. They were having gatherings at home, reading scripture and singing together. And women were just as valid leaders and doing lots of evangelism, and died for that. Like, we read about the women martyrs. And so I think the Mennonites unintentionally were feminists from the beginning, that wore away as things do when you become more integrated and affluent. But I also think it's still really interesting that like Mennonite Anabaptists, like those early radical reformers, really believed the Spirit guiding humans in the interpretation of scripture. And that didn't matter. It didn't matter your gender or whether you were married. So like, those are just some things that I think offer themselves naturally, between being Anabaptist Mennonite and a feminist.
And last but not least, we interviewed a wonderful lady by the name of Lois Clausen. She is a recent addition to the pastoral teams in Mennonite Church, British Columbia. She is the first female lead pastor we've had in a little while, and she is a recent pastor in her older years. So we asked her about her experience of becoming a pastor as a woman and what that looked like for her in her journey.
I kind of have the same story on both sides of my family. So both sets of my grandparents came from Russia or the Ukraine in the late 1920s and ended up in the Fraser Valley. In actually, both of my sets of grandparents when I was a kid were in Greendale, so outside of Chilliwack. Mennonite church-wise, I grew up in a Mennonite Brethren church and then went to Mennonite Brethren Bible College in Winnipeg, which is now part of Canadian Mennonite University. And yeah, I've actually been in Mennonite Brethren churches up until 2022. And then as of this past September, I'm in a Mennonite church as pastor.
Yeah, would you mind just kind of telling us the story of how you started becoming a pastor? And you had mentioned a comment on how women often are later in life to being pastors because their call, they don't get to hear it as soon in their life. And so I just would love to hear you speak more on that and that comment that you had made.
Okay. I feel like the possibility has been sort of on my horizon forever. So when I was in my late 20s, and my husband James and I were living in New Westminster, and I don't know if this was before or after our son was born, I actually applied. So I had a bachelor's degree in religious studies from University of Winnipeg, and I actually applied to Regent College and thought this was real. I never felt content with where I had left my theological studies. Like it was always calling me to take that farther on the studying side of things. Um, and then got accepted at Regent and decided the timing wasn't right. And that's when we ended up moving up to the Peace River. And I also was paying attention to what was happening in my denomination in the Mennonite Brethren Conference, provincially and nationally, and thought, I bet when I'm 50, this is going to work a lot better. I just thought that I was naively hopeful that there would be a certain trajectory of increased openness to women in pastoral ministry in Mennonite Brethren churches. So our small church in Dawson Creek was really open. We really functioned as an inter-Mennonite church because of who was there. And I got to do lots of different things, including preaching. And also was noticing that the trajectory in the Mennonite Brethren Conference was kind of a hardening of lines and a retrenchment in a certain way, and not at all what I was expecting or what I had imagined was inevitable. We moved back down to the Lower Mainland in 2011, and I was again part of a couple of MB churches that were very open to encouraging, not just open, but actively supportive and nurturing of women preaching and doing all kinds of stuff. So that was good. But also as I got older, I became more aware and hopefully discerning about what parts I had missed, which I kind of put under the umbrella of shoulder tapping. And it's that people who know you in community, and people that have different kinds of leadership roles and carry credibility in a congregation or in a denomination, sort of suggesting or affirming what they see as gifts or potential or actual what they've observed somebody doing and showing strengths in. And now I look back and I think about December in Bible college when just before Christmas, we're in the middle of deadlines for writing papers and exams, and the guys that I was good friends with, if they were part of churches and were going home for Christmas, they would have been asked to preach when they came home. And I actually remember helping a friend edit his sermon. And now it's just like, okay, I can see how this works. There's a whole, I would say, an informal networking and nurturing that happened with young men that didn't happen with young women because those doors were closed in many ways and they were assumed to be closed. So the reality and the perception. So when you repeat that over generations, all of a sudden it looks like, oh, well, there aren't very many women who have these skills or who want these roles. So it obviously isn't really a big issue. But that is the product of a system or a non-system of cultivating leadership. Oh, I actually want to tell a story about the moment that I kind of was ready. And it was the church I was part of in Abbotsford was Highland Community Church. And two people who actually I got to high school with both of them. They were both a year younger than me. Christine Campen, who was one of the pastors, and Kathy Hardy, who is a singer-songwriter and leads retreats and is a spiritual director. They were doing a Sunday morning service together that was Celtic themed. They had brought in evergreen trees and covered the entire front of the stage of the church. And I actually can't tell you a lot about what happened in the service because I was only there for the first few minutes of it. So here were these two, fabulous women who are almost my same age, um, so extravagantly using their gifts in church ministry and their creativity and their passion. And I was hiding. And I actually just started to weep at the beginning of the service. And had to walk out and spent the whole service, missed it, which would have been a beautiful thing. But the church had a community garden that was a labyrinth, and it was a very cold, wet day, I think February. And I just spent that whole hour walking this labyrinth winter garden and weeping and realizing that that's what I was called to was that kind of generosity and offering what I had in a community. And then that spring, I registered for seminary and started in September.
Yeah. Do you feel like any maybe grief is the right word? I don't know, about just like the fact that you missed out on a lot of years that could have been this ministry that you do now?
I don't feel that sense of loss about the work, about, oh, I didn't get to do this work for a few decades. I feel a lot of things, a lot of, I would say, grief and anger about the whole thing. The that I'm just one person and that how much the whole um, life and mission and vibrancy of a denomination has been skewed and diminished and off track, and um, less faithful and less imaginative and less of so many things than it might have been if there had been a full access to the gifts that the Holy Spirit gives the church.
So, Lois, the reason we reached out to her and asked her to talk, well, first of all, she's really cool, but I am the administrator for Mennonite Church, British Columbia, and at our recent pastors retreat, Lois was at it, and we had a speaker who was talking about kind of the call on your life and how often that comes from people tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, I think you're really good at this. And Lois had mentioned in that meeting, she put up her hand and made a comment saying, for women, that call often is missed, and especially in your younger years because you're a female and not as many people will see that quality in you. She just mentioned how that's something that many women don't get to hear until much later in their life, and that's when they start to hear that call on their life from other people. And so I thought that was really interesting and a really cool take on why women often take longer to get to that point of being in ministry, because it just takes that long for them to hear that call on their life, perhaps, or to be affirmed in it as well.
I think she also alluded to, but didn't say, or maybe I'm reading into it, but I think she alluded to this idea of the boys' club, like women don't get chances to go up in whatever career they have because the boys go out golfing and they talk in the changing room and they there's spaces that women aren't in that men get to rise to the top in, and it's easier for a guy to climb a ladder than a woman to climb a ladder.
And though all voices at the table might be heard in a Mennonite context, if you're not invited to the table or feel like you want to be at the table in the first place, then your voice isn't going to get heard.
Yeah, totally. So we are both, as we said, in our 30s, so we are not in this late stage career, or we haven't had kids, but we have both got to watch our mom, who is a Mennonite, not culturally, but has embraced the tradition and
she's Mennonite now. She's so involved in Mennonite world. She's definitely
very Mennonite now. But it's been interesting that we watched her be a pastor's wife. Both of us, we have a dad as a pastor, and so she grew up as we watched her grow up. She was this pastor's wife, and she took care of the kids, and she put her career aside again and again and again.
She was really the ideal pastor's wife when you think of one.
Yeah,
she was perfect.
She did all the right things. But she never got to be the center stage, and she never got the job, and she never got
she never got to do the ministry.
The acclaim to fame is she is the pastor or the leader. It was always she's helping our dad. And so when we all graduated and our dad stepped down from pastoring, we watched them make a shift in how that looked. And it
was an intentional shift.
Yeah, it was intentional. And our mom's career, she got to choose it, and our dad followed her to what she was doing. And
so he built his life around what she wanted to do.
And in her last job she had, our dad went to a pastor's conference with her instead of she was the pastor's wife, he was the pastor's wife. So it's been fun to see this this shift in her life, and just she can thrive in a way that she couldn't. And some of it was just she had 5 kids. Someone has to take care of them.
She had so much going on, but she still did so much while doing that as well. It never stopped her from doing ministry, though she might not have been the one paid doing it.
But now for her to get to do the things that she's dreamt of,
and she's so good at it too. Everything she touches turns to gold.
She's a champion.
It's crazy cool what she does.
Yeah, so I think that's important. Okay, so how does this play into
our show,
our story?
Okay, so our character is eventually going to be in her older years.
Yeah, by the 5th episode, we want this stage of life.
This is going to be interesting trying to play this when I've obviously never experienced this.
And to write, generally you say write what you know.
Yeah.
To not have lived this life.
Yeah, so these interviews will be really helpful for that, of just trying to get into that mentality. But trying to feel out what that identity shift might look like for our character, and where what she knew her whole life changes, and now she has to adapt to that, and who she is now. That identity piece will be really interesting to explore. I don't know, we haven't really talked about where we want to go with that yet.
Yeah, I think that we'll need to there's so much that we don't know of the story yet, which is so interesting that it's still being written, and so we need a direction at this point.
We need to know where it's going.
Yeah,
where it's heading.
We don't even know the end. We're is she dead or is she alive at the end? We don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think this also plays into that too. It's
it helps us figure out what needs to happen.
And so I think what's important to say at this point.
What do women in this stage of life need to hear and see represented on a stage?
Yeah, because something that I have been doing very consciously is I love Pinterest, and I have a board on Pinterest right now that's called aging, a heart or something. I forget what it's called. But the idea is that I just post and pin things that are images of women in their 50s, 60s, 70s who have wrinkles and gray hair. And I'm that's a beautiful woman. And that's someone I can look up to and be I want to look like that, or I want to be like that, or emulate that kind of aesthetic or vibe. And I put it in there because we are told once you've wrinkled, once you've gone into menopause, which is also not talked about. I feel that's something we need to mention.
Right.
Once you've gone in menopause, your life stops having meaning. You're not
fertile.
Yeah, fertile and producing children, and you're not beautiful anymore, and
you're
you're
not useful for anything anymore.
So then you're just kind of
What's
looked
the
aside.
point? Yeah. And in historically, if a woman at that point probably hasn't done much education or hasn't done anything to like develop her other skills. So yeah, her kids are gone. Her needing to take care of the household is gone. So what does she have left?
Yeah.
Like, there's really that identity piece is major there.
Yeah. So I'm trying to influence or like de-influence myself. That,
yeah,
like,
that's cool.
This is my goal. Like I'm gonna look like this.
I can look like that, and I'll be happy with it.
Because like I just like noticed within myself that I stopped dreaming my life past like 45.
Totally. I felt that with 30. Once I hit 30, I was like, I don't actually have anything I know that I want to do anymore.
My dreams are gone.
Am I just done with life now?
And it's so weird.
There's
like
so much left of life.
Yeah, like there's so much more past that, but it's
Yeah.
like there's this thing inside of us that we're like not looking forward. So anyway, I think that's an important part of the identity.
Yeah, totally. So that'll be something fun to explore.
So we're gonna
Looking
figure it
forward to
out.
trying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Have a good time.
Good time
And,
talking with you.
Go look at yourself in the mirror for a while and say nice things.
And like love your wrinkles.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. Smile lines.
Yeah.
Like
it's so nice.
no shade if you hate them, but they're beautiful. So